All right, my friends, how do you find data at the BEA on national income by industry? I got that request this morning. Wanted to give you a little tour. You go to the BEA.gov. As of the 8th October 2025, we're still in the midst of the shutdown. So we do have historical data. We don't have new data. Go to the data icon, click down here to data by topic. And then you want to look at all this great stuff. GDP by industry. It's like a smorgasbord. Okay, switch on down. Interactive data. Once you click on that, lots of stuff pops up. Okay, so go down to the bottom here. All sorts of guides and interactive materials. Deep dive on the way in which the NIPA accounts are constructed. We don't need that. Historical tables. The data that we'll have goes back to, depending upon the industry and the line item, back to the 1940s, sometimes to 1997. Historical tables have older data, but the trick there is that sometimes their methodology is different. Sometimes they're indexed at different points. So it takes great care to be able to splice these things together. I try to do some of that on the National Income Project over at the Market Observatory. But for now, click Interactive Data Tables. Okay, one, two, three, four. I'll give you a quick tour of each of these. Let's start at the top of the income statement, gross output. Gross out, can I make that bigger for you? There we go. Gross output by industry. So that's revenues, gross sales, gross output. All right, so it gives it to you by industry. Now, if you scroll on down, you can see the way in which it's categorized. That's for all industries. Think about that as the super category. And then there's two types. There's private, and then scroll on down, scroll on down, scroll on down, public or quote unquote government. All right. We're often thinking about the conglomeration of the two. We'll focus on industries inside of the private, but you can pick government industries as well. They got that data there. Go back on up. And then within there, you have sectors, industries, and even sub-industries. One of the tricks is that there's different levels of depth over which they are calculated. So for instance, we have a sector called ag, forestry, fishing, hunting. Inside of there is an industry group, farms, and another industry group, forestry. Meanwhile, take a look at utilities. You got that sector, but there's no industry group or industry sub-industry. Meanwhile, go to manufacturing, manufacturing sector, durable goods, industry, woods, wood products, sub-industry. The reason why that's relevant is because if you're trying to take a look at an exhaustive view across all of the fine slicing of this, we need to make sure that we're adding together the proper level of depth. We can't just add together all of the sub-industries and get to the total because we would have missed utilities and construction, for instance. So keep that in mind as you're collecting. Now, when you go to the top over here, you can modify, and you can modify by choosing just the particular sector that you want, if you want it that way. You can select quarters or annual. Annual has, go over here, more data, see A and Q, annual and quarterly. A, just annual. I had warned about this before, going back to 1997. That's the furthest we can go without dipping into the historical tables and without confronting those issues about splicing the data together. You can set it to millions or billions either way. Just make sure that you keep track of it. Refresh the table. And we got it for ag sector, 1997 forward. Now, if you want to get that, a couple of ways you could do. You could chart it out, or you can get to the table and download it directly into Excel or CSV. Doesn't matter, but usually loading into a Python or R, loading into CSV is a little bit more flexible. All right, so that's top line. Go back to industry. Now, you could also do quantity indices or price indices. We've talked about those before as well. How much stuff was sold, not the dollar value, but how much stuff. That's the quantity index. What was the price of the stuff that I sold? That's the price index. You could get reals, contributions, etc. Go on down the income statement. You could go to intermediate inputs. That's your COGS. And the same structure of the sectors. Same structure for modifying, getting it to annual or quarterly, picking the industry, dipping on back. same horizon, which is really nice, which means then for at least these two major line items, you could go back in equal distance, you have a balanced panel. And then once again, you can download. Go back to industry over here, you have quantity indices and price indices for those COGS. All right. All right. So we got the top and the COGS. Remember, we have gross profit. We'll call that value added here. And we can get value added by industry. And you could check that, right? You could take this number for Q2 2025 and then subtract off the intermediate, pardon me, the gross output for 2025 Q2, the COGS for 2025 Q2, and you should get 266.9. The data does get revised and updated, so you have to be aware of when you're doing it and what you're comparing to. So we have that COGS. If you go over here, you can actually also take a look at the components. And remember, there's lots of components for each industry's income statement. Compensation of employees, row 10. So that's like part of the big part of your OPEX. Tax on production, that's another part of OPEX. And then gross operating surplus, that's like your EBITDA, line 12. So we have a little bit more of the income statement. When you go over here to modify, unfortunately, none of that is available at a quarterly frequency. So the horizon time-wise differs. The frequency differs as you go into line items. It's an unfortunate reality. The more granular the data, the less we have available. You can get quantity indices, just like we had before. So that's the volume of stuff in terms of the profits and prices as well. Okay, so we got top line, we got COGS, we got some measures further down the income statement, like gross profits and EBITDA, a little bit of OPEX. And if you scooch on down here to CLEMS, there's a wealth of information. Let's take a look at the composition of gross output. Some of this is redundant based upon what we've seen before, but it's a greater level of granularity. Let's go back to that industry ag. So you have that value added, which is that gross output. You got your comp of employees, your tax on production, non-income taxes, and then your EBITDA. You also have your COGS, which is going to be on the intermediate inputs, all lined up by their components. So we already saw where you could get this number 364.2 and the components of it previously. This just gives it to you in one fell swoop. So again, you need to do a little bit of massaging of the data, but you have all that wealth of info right there. You can get the percentages, you can get to the chain type indices for energy on quantity and the chain type energy indices on energy for price. So each of the three components of COGS, right, the energy, materials, and the services, you can get the total on them as well as the P and Q on them. So if you're thinking about analyzing what's going to happen with oil price shock and which industry is going to be impacted the most, you can take a look at the price of those inputs as well. That's referred to as CLEMS. This last chunk here is perhaps the richest, the most difficult to deal with, though. Hope that helps.